Hi, I'm Ton from Gouda, also known as Gouda, the cheese town of the Netherlands. I'm social geographer, I work as a guide, and I have a strong interest in art and history. I decided to combine those two fields in a lecture called Dutch History in Paintings and Maps. And today we are going to do the first of the four lectures. There we go. Yep. So my full name, Ton van Garderen. Garderen is a village in the center of the Netherlands, so most likely my ancestors did come from that area. Dutch Culture Tours, that's the name of my company for lectures and tours in many of the beautiful Dutch towns, also Belgium and part of Germany. And the paintings do belong to the Rijksmuseum Amsterdam, all the paintings used for these lectures. The website of the Rijksmuseum is rijksmuseum.com, and part of that website is the so-called Rijksstudio. There you can find all the paintings used for these lectures. Four lectures. The first from the Roman time till the early Middle Age, the second Middle and late Middle Age, the third after 1500 till 1400 till 1848, and the last lecture will be with you by Zoom, and that's question time for all the questions about the earlier lectures. Okay, I think by now you've seen me long enough, so I get out of this picture. The subjects of the lectures: power and government, economy, urbanization, and water. Partly a blessing for the Dutch development, partly a curse. Before going into history, let's have a look at present-day Netherlands. In the circle, Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, located in the province North Holland. Amsterdam is not the center of the national government. No, that's The Hague, in Dutch Den Haag, located in the province South Holland. So here we see Holland as the western part of the Netherlands. Two of the 12 provinces which make up the Netherlands, the other 10, Zeeland, Noord-Brabant, Limburg, Gelderland, Utrecht, Flevoland, Overijssel, Drenthe, Friesland, Groningen. Our neighbors in the East Germany, in the South Belgium, in the West Britain. To get a more global perspective, a map of the former Roman Empire. We see the Netherlands in the circle, and we also see that the Netherlands is located on the northern border of the Roman Empire, going from East Europe through the Netherlands to England. And here, between or at the border of Scotland and England, that's the most northern point of the Roman Empire. So in a moment, we'll see why the Romans wanted to go to the north of Britain and not to the north of the Netherlands. That will be the next slide. Let's first look at the situation in the Netherlands. Here we see the river Rhine coming in from Germany. Here the river Maas, here it is, the river Maas coming in from France, the North Sea, and well, a lot of dots and squares. Roman fortifications and settlements in the 1st century after Christ. And some of those fortifications and settlements grew to cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants. And then we are talking about Leiden, 124,000 inhabitants nowadays. We are talking about Utrecht, the 4th largest town of the Netherlands. We are talking about B and C in Nijmegen, almost 200,000 inhabitants, and Maastricht, just over 100,000. Didn't the Romans go in the north? Yes, for a couple of years. It started in the early 40s of the first century after Christ. Then the Frisians came from the north to the areas occupied by the Romans just north of the river Rhine. Before those areas had been used by the Frisians for their cattle. Nowadays, Frisia is famous for its dairy products, the cows, the milk. But also in the Roman time, there were already cows in the Frisian territories. So the Frisians were not too happy with the Roman army occupying their country. There were a couple of battles in the early 40s of the first century. And well, the Roman Emperor Claudius at that time, he told his troops in the Netherlands, don't spend too much energy on those Frisians, because I want you to go over the North Sea to Britain. That's far more interesting than that peat area in the Netherlands. And what was so interesting for the Romans in England? What did the English have what we didn't? Minerals. And one of the minerals of Britain was and is fluoride. And that material was used, for example, for production of colored glass. The Netherlands in the north also had and has minerals, and gas, for example, that's the most important mineral of the Netherlands. But the Romans didn't know, and had they known, they couldn't have used it because it's too deep below surface. Yeah, we skip from the 40s till the 70s of the first century after Christ. And shortly before the 70s, there had been a couple of riots between Dutch tribes and the Romans. The leader of the Dutch was Claudius Civilis, and the Roman commander who was in charge of tranquilizing those Dutch tribes was Petilius Cerealis. We see them in this painting of Ferdinand Bol. Ferdinand Bol, by the way, a student of Rembrandt. And on this side of the bridge, we see the Dutch man, and here the Roman leader of the army, the Roman commander. A demolished bridge is quite handy, because then it's almost impossible for the one to kill the other. The work was commissioned by the City Council of Amsterdam shortly after 1648. That was a very important year in the history of the Netherlands, because that was the year that our neighbors and former enemy Spain did recognize the independency of the Netherlands, at that time the Republic of the Seven United Provinces. Well, that was a good reason for celebration, and part of the celebration in the Netherlands was the construction of a new town hall in Amsterdam. Money was no problem. Amsterdam was extremely rich at that time, so it was decided to have a new city hall which had to be decorated, and that's why the city council commissioned Ferdinand Bol to make a work with a relationship between kicking out the Spanish and the fight against the Romans by the Dutch ancestors in the first century after Christ. So that's the message of this painting. Like the Romans could get rid of the Romans, we got our freedom after the Spanish occupation. And of course, much more about that Spanish occupation, that will be lecture 2. Well, the Romans did tranquilize those tribes, those Dutch tribes, and life went on as usual until the end of the 3rd century. And then the Romans, or most of them, went back home, and not because they didn't like the cuisine anymore, or because they got bored of the Dutch climate. No, it was a part of the general decline of the West Roman Empire, not the East Roman Empire with Constantinople, present-day Istanbul, as their center. The East Roman Empire went on till 1425, when Istanbul was destroyed by the Ottomans, the present-day Turks. but the West Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century after Christ. Probably you remember the year 476. That was the year that the last Roman emperor was replaced by a Hun. And a Hun, or the Huns, a tribe from Eastern Europe, they invaded Western Europe from 400 on. And not only the Huns, but also the Vandals and the so-called Visigoths. So yeah, one of the reasons of the decline of the Roman Empire was this aggression from the tribes of the eastern part of Europe. But there were more reasons. One of those reasons was the laid-back mentality in the Roman Empire. And also a very strong reason, the eternal fight among the rulers and would-be rulers of Rome. So instead of speaking of the eternal city, we better can speak about the eternal fight. Well, those reasons were responsible for the decline, and nobody knows the exact recipe of this spicy cocktail. The recipe has gone with those who were there 1600 years ago. But for us, the important fact is that most of the Romans went back home. For sure, some of those Romans did stay in the Netherlands. They might have found their Dutch Juliet, and those Romans did contribute to the diversification of the Dutch DNA. The Romans went home. The tribes from Eastern Europe were more active in Spain and Italy, but in our areas, the states became available for the Franks. The Franks, originally located at the eastern part of the river Rhine, but when the Romans went home, they saw their opportunity to conquer the whole blue area, present-day France. And the situation on this map is around the year 770 after Christ. The blue areas conquered by the Franks. A bit later on, Charlemagne would conquer the orange parts, and the yellow parts were independent of the Franks, but a strong influence of the Frank culture on these parts. So not territory, but a certain dependence. At the same time, 770, 780 after Christ, the situation of the Netherlands was as following. The Franks in the south, the Saxons originally from Germany in the east, and the Frisians in the north and west of present-day Netherlands. We see two cities on this map, Utrecht and Dokkum. Well, Utrecht was the center of Christianization of the Franks. Wherever the Franks went, they tried to impose Christianity, their state religion, on the conquered tribes. And that was the same, that was also the case in Friesland, in Frisian. And one of the missionaries, Bonifatius, went to Dokkum in the year 754 after Christ. And he was not really welcomed there. Even more, he lost his life. Well, in the following centuries, the Frisians were Christianized and became kind of administrators for the Franks. But that was much time later, much wars later. Then Charlemagne comes on stage. And Charlemagne was born near Aachen in Germany. It also might have been in northern France. Nobody knows exactly, but let's say not more than 200 kilometers away from Aachen, which is located here. In the year 800, Charlemagne went to Rome to have a meeting with the Pope, Leo III, and the purpose was to get crowned to Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Holy because of the Pope, Roman as a reference to the former Roman Empire. Well, that was done in the year 800. Charlemagne returns home to Aachen, and 14 years later he dies. Charlemagne had two sons, but at the time he dies, only one son did survive, and that was Ludwig. So Ludwig is the new emperor of the orange, green, and blue part on this map. Ludwig knew that a certain day he wouldn't be there anymore, that he had to change the temporary for the eternal, to die. So during his life, he came up with the future division of his empire. And that's what we see here. The orange part should go to his son Lodewijk, the green part to Lotharius, and the blue part to Charles, in Dutch, Karel. And after Ludwig deceased, eventually, after a lot of struggle, the three brothers agreed on the division of the empire as their father had foreseen. And that was in the town of Verdun in France in the year 843 after Christ, that those three brothers did agree on the division of Europe. And as you see, Netherlands was part of the empire of Lotharius, the so-called Middle Empire. And Lotharius was the oldest of the three sons, so he inherited this title, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, a title which would exist for almost 1,000 years till Napoleon took power. Later on, lecture 2, we will come back to the importance of this title, but now for today it has been enough about government and power. Let's go to another subject, and that's water. Water, a curse and a blessing because it's made possible to transport persons and goods. The Romans were only in the southern part of the Netherlands, so in the north there were no Roman roads. There were Roman roads in all of southern Europe, Italy of course, Spain, France, Germany, but not in the northern part of the Netherlands. So all transport had to be done by ship. So in that way water was a blessing, but it also was a curse because the water took a lot of land. Let's look at the first map, 500 before Christ. Then this body of water is a lake. Here we have the North Sea, but there's not yet a connection between the North Sea and this lake. So this was fresh water. Here we have the situation 50 years after Christ. And then we see there's a small entrance of salt water from the North Sea to this former lake, which by then is an inner sea. And that inner sea becomes bigger and bigger. This is the situation 800 years after Christ. And we see what once used to be land nowadays is water. So the sea took a lot of land. Also here in the southwest, in the province Zeeland. So not water, a curse and a blessing for the people in the north and the south. It was much more a curse than a blessing. and to maintain, to keep dry feed. People in the north, in present-day province Friesland and Groningen, decided to make hills of waste, so artificial hills, and construct their houses on top of those little hills. Today we know about 1,200 of those hills, and for sure there must have been much more, but they were covered by layers of soil of the later centuries. And not only waste was used for the construction of those hills, also manure. And that brings us to the next point: economy of the Netherlands in the early Middle Age. There were some cities, those Roman settlements who remained and who got more population, but most of the Dutch did live on the countryside, and they were dedicated to agriculture and dedicated to dairy production, most of all, not so much crops. Later on potatoes as well, but that's after the Spanish went to Peru. You probably know that the potato was brought to Europe from Peru. So in the early Middle Age, agriculture was mainly dairy products, milk, butter and cheese. Well, that's all for today. The next lecture will be the middle and later part of the Middle Ages. For now, thanks for watching. Hope to see you again on the next lecture, and good luck till soon.